How has surrogacy become such a dangerous business?
Well, surrogacy is one of the more controversial forms of family building using reproductive technology, and the extent to which this represents a danger or risk to anybody really depends on the levels of regulation and safeguards that might be in place to protect the interests of the people most directly involved. Now, in the UK, we have some fairly comprehensive legislation that is designed to protect the interests of all the parties involved, and to a large extent, as far as we know, that seems to work. But people may go from the UK or indeed any other countries to other parts of the world where surrogacy is not regulated, where there are increasing concerns about the extent to which the intending parents themselves might be at risk of misleading information. They might be charged fees that, fees might be advertised and they might find they have to pay a lot more. There might be legal problems that they hadn't anticipated. For the surrogates in some countries, they might well be exploited. They might well be promised a certain sum of money before they start, and then when they've conceived, had the baby, they may not get what they were originally promised. The aftercare for them from a medical point of view might be less than expected or less than desirable. And for children themselves, particularly when different countries, different jurisdictions are involved, there may be legal problems. And there have been instances, for example, of Europeans going to India and have had a baby through surrogacy there, and have then been stuck in India for up to 2 years while the legal problems have been sorted out. So the parents can return to their country of origin with the baby because there are so many legal inconsistencies, and that remains one of the most difficult areas at the moment.
And do couples look to go abroad because they perceive it to be easier, less expensive?
It's a combination of reasons. In the UK, commercial surrogacy is not allowed. Reasonable expenses only may be paid. That's somewhat of a grey area in terms of expense of what might be considered to be reasonable expenses. But in other parts of the world, surrogates can charge a fee. India and California are classic examples of that, where actually paying for a surrogate is accepted. And certainly California has a very thriving commercial surrogacy industry where the payment of surrogates is allowed. There are healthcare professionals, there are lawyers who are well versed in the procedures. And for example, Elton John and his partner, both of their children were conceived as a result of a Californian-based surrogacy arrangement. And that was, of course, very expensive. If you think about India, for example, where surrogates very often come from impoverished families, where they are doing this in order to provide basic necessities for their families, then the cost of a surrogate is actually considerably lower.
Are there also instances abroad where women are forced by perhaps organised crime as such to be surrogates?
There's certainly been one instance of that reported in the media, which involved some Vietnamese women who'd been kidnapped and trafficked, and they were found by the authorities somewhere in Thailand. I don't recall all the details off the top of my head, but they had actually been trafficked for the purpose of being surrogates, and Taiwanese people were involved as well. So it's quite a complicated international scenario there. Now, clearly, that's just one instance that we know about. I mean, who knows how much else goes on that we simply don't know about.
You would obviously want more legislation and more monitoring to be introduced worldwide, but we are talking worldwide. That's a massive thing to undertake. What would you see as a sort of first step? What would you like to see? You've written a book on this subject. Where would you like to see perhaps it go from there?
You might well be trying to lobby for governments to get together to standardise legislation, but quite frankly, that's not going to happen. And I do think some standardisation or some acceptance of recognisable standards within medical practice endorsed by the professional associations that medical practitioners are expected and required to adhere to would be a really good way forward.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.